I am thrilled to be here with Andrew. We've had some chats and I've really enjoyed and I've learnt a lot from those chats. So Andrew is going to talk about the emotional experience of dogs, how to best support our canine companions. And just to give a bit of a rundown on Andrew, he's a certified animal behaviourist and is the behavioural consultant for Pet Remedy. He also works with many dog rescue organisations around the UK with a degree and a background in human psychology. Andrew is passionate about exploring the emotional experiences that lie behind the behaviour, both in dogs and humans. So you were listening to Esme's talk just a minute ago.
I loved Esme's talk.
There we go.
Yes.
And Andrew has played a leading role in the UK dog training and behaviour community, having been the chair of the Association of Interdogs. Interdogs.
Yeah,
That's
Interdogs.
rolling off the tongue, isn't it? And the driving force behind the UK Dog Behaviour and Training Charter. In 2020, Andrew started the Dog-Centred Care, which focuses on supporting a dog-led approach to providing the best care for the support of the dog. Within the online Facebook Dog-Centred Care group, he has been hosting online conversations with some of the world's most cutting-edge trainers, scientists, researchers, trauma experts and vets. And I urge you to have a look at his website and follow him on Facebook. So we're going to have a very relaxed chat here, aren't we? And tell us a little bit about your history with animals and how you got to this position from having done human psychology.
Well, first of all, Tammy, what a great event you put on. And thank you for all the hard work that you and your team do, because I know it's a lot goes into these things. And I've learned a lot today, and I loved your chat with Esme just. So this is going to kind of roll on from that. So I think for me, the emotional experience is the lens that I look at most things through. So if we think about that, the emotional experience, we all experience things, how we're all a unique combination of our genetics, our early experiences, our secure and insecure attachments, our trauma, all these kind of things go to make how we deal with the world and what the world throws at us. And that's part of our emotional experience, how we experience that kind of connection to the world around us. And there's two things about the emotional experience that are important for me. The first is we all have one. Yeah. So the donkeys have one, you have one, the dog has one, the cat has one. Now, a lot of people have said in the past, and some people still say it, that, well, we don't know how the dog thinks and feels. We don't know how the donkey thinks and feels. But this is the second bit about the emotional experience. They're all unique to us as individuals. So I know no more about how you think and feel than the donkey, the cat, or the horse, or whoever. So should we ignore that then and just make the other do stuff based on our version of normal, our version of safety, or whatever it is? So I think that's the lens that I like to look at things through, and that definitely connects through from the human side of things to animals, and especially dogs, which is my kind of thing, really. And I think for me, we've got to do better. That's what we're going to talk about now, at informing the general public especially about this wonderful animal that they share their lives with, talking dogs, but same with a donkey if you've got one, or a cat or a horse or anything, because there's a richness there. And I think the general public it's a relatively new thing really, but I think especially over the last 30 or 40 years, they've been convinced that the most important thing is to have a well-trained, obedient dog. The issue there, and of course it's good to do training and it's good to have a dog that can understand you, but if that is the primary focus, where's that animal's ability to be able to say, actually I'm struggling with this today, or I can't do that now? So the general public know how to teach sit, great, but they don't know what pain looks like, or what stress looks like, or development periods, or all these kind of things. And the big thing I want to focus on today, because of this, the human-animal bond awareness, if we're going to have a bond, if we're going to have that connection, then we have to have communication that's both ways. We need to learn about how we can teach our dogs using reinforcement in a supportive way so that they can understand what we need. But we also need to be open to what they're trying to communicate to us. And as a social species especially, and this is the big connection for me, we are geared to seek secure attachments, secure social attachments, as are our dogs. And in fact, this is the connection for me. Most of what I learned back in the day around social processing, social pain especially, attachments, guess what? We learned that from the studies on animals, especially in the 50s and 60s. So I think this is what we have to think about. That bond is there for us if we can understand each other more. And I think some of the information that's out there, especially with dogs, just puts a barrier to that bond sometimes, because if we're asking our dog to do something and they're not, there's a pressure to think, oh, they're being disobedient. So how do I get them to do it? When in fact the dog's saying, I can't do this right now.
And is that going to be improved by just training, or what does the owner need to read from the dog to pick up on why it's not doing something?
Well, this is really important. So actually, training isn't the answer sometimes, and this is the thing that we have to recognise. It is about being able to be more present with our dogs and learn about what that communication actually is about. Because we're, as a species, we're really into structured learning. You know, we put kids through school, we put dogs through dog training, but Mother Nature has a bigger emphasis on experiential learning. And there's a great little saying in human psychology, which is a powerful one, and one for us to really think about. There is a difference between what we're taught and what we learn.
Right.
So we can teach something, teach a lesson, however we want to teach it, but what is the other actually learning, especially in a fundamental place? Because there are three things I feel that connect us all, regardless of species. The first is to feel heard. So if we're trying to communicate something, and when we think about behaviour, that's all the animals have to communicate with us. We can make a judgment about the animal's behaviour, and that's what happens a lot. In fact, for me, there's only two types of behaviour. There's the behaviour we judge in others,
Right.
because we love to judge, and often with the smallest amount of information. And bearing in mind that judgment is because of what we think based on our own safe worldview, not necessarily representative of the other's experience. The other type of behaviour is the behaviour we do ourselves. And that's why we hate to be judged, right? Because it's complicated. So I could say, Tammy, I'm going to judge you now. And you could be like, hang on, Andy, you don't know me that well. You don't know what I'm going through. And this is the key, you see. So we want to feel heard. And if we see behaviour, rather than just being something, we're all kind of indoctrinated in what we call the good-bad continuum, this notion that somehow behaviour is good, through neutral, through bad. And then we want to reinforce the good, and we want to either punish or ignore the bad, right? And that makes so much sense. We're so indoctrinated into that as a view of behaviour that we don't really question it until we ask a question, which is who's deciding what's good or bad, and how representative of that behaviour that I've decided is bad in another is actually just an expression of need.
So let's talk about, say, a dog is barking and a lot of people will just tell it to be quiet. They won't look at why it's barking.
And that's the key, and I totally get it. The thing is, this is the thing about, if we go back to those three things and come back to the barking then, because the one is to feel heard. We all want to feel heard, especially when we're trying to communicate need. We don't want to be ignored. We don't want to be corrected, which is a big word that we use in dog training. The second is that we want to feel safe.
Yeah.
Our brains are literally wired for it now. When we think about safety in another, so when we think about dogs or our family, whatever, we tend to have a bias towards physical safety because that's what our brain can get information back from. So, oh, Tammy's physically safe because I can see she's. However, our own brain is just as, if not more, interested in emotional and social safety. And that's why you can be safe physically but not feel it. So we want to feel safe. And then the final one is to find relief. And this is the most, for me personally, the most important word in the psychology of behaviour is the word relief. Because the whole point of having emotional stuff, especially the negative stuff, whether that's physical pain, emotional pain, social pain, is to drive us to seek relief, if you think about it. So if you've got toothache, you find pain relief, right? So a lot of these behaviours that we see as being bad, naughty, difficult, challenging, are actually just relief-seeking behaviours. Right. So the barking, there could be all sorts of reasons why the dog's barking, but there is something there. So I specialise in working with in inverted commas, aggression. That's what we use it as a word colloquially, but it doesn't really tell us much. But anyway, and many of those dogs are what might be classed as being dangerous, potentially. But why are they? Because they are definitely not feeling safe, and they're definitely trying to get relief for something. And actually, in my time working with some of the challenging cases, I've not met a dog yet that wasn't in pain. Physical pain often, but emotional pain and social pain are equally as important and often interconnected. So going back to the barking dog then, I totally get it when people are, I just need my dog to stop barking, I just need my dog to stop doing things, and that's what I class as a task-orientated approach, and I totally get it. But quite often, caregivers will end up in what we from a human perspective, we call conflict cycles. So something triggers that dog's nervous system, which creates the behaviour. That triggers a response in us, which we're like, oh, dog's playing up again, which triggers our response. So we get stuck in a conflict cycle, but probably for people listening in, especially if you have a dog who barks and they think, yeah, I'm going to tell you off now, or I'm going to use this compressed air can or whatever. Oh, it does work, but does it? Because when the next thing happens, the dog's likely to do the same thing again because there is something underneath that hasn't been supported, and we just get stuck in that cycle. So I think this is just a way of looking at things in a different way. We have to think about our own way that we regulate, but we have to think about the doggies we share our lives with, especially the ones that have the bigger, more challenging behaviours, because that dog is desperately trying to communicate something.
Do they tend to escalate from something small that's not recognised to something bigger, to something very damaging?
Well, just like with us humans, I think, it depends. So you get some dogs who are like, trying to tell you I'm struggling, I'm being told off for it, my communication isn't working, so I won't communicate anymore. We see that with kids, children, we see it in relationships, sadly. So that's a kind of almost a form of learned helplessness, if you like, I think.
Can you just explain that, learned helplessness?
Well, it's a bit of in a very simple way, it's just where we kind of learn that help doesn't come. So it doesn't matter what you communicate, you won't get that relief, and so you just stop communicating. There's a lot more, for the geeks listening, there's a lot more that's been revisited now from a kind of from a psychological science point of view. But when you think about it, if I'm going to be right, okay, especially in relation to attachment, the thing about finding secure attachments, and our brain is literally wired to find it. If you were my secure attachment, and I'm trying to communicate to you that actually I can't do this now, Tammy, or I'm struggling with this, or I need to find safety, and I'm falling on deaf ears, then this becomes an insecure attachment, and I'm likely to stop communicating with you. Or you're not going to become relevant to me when I'm stressed. So when you think about a dog then who's barking at another dog and they're being told off for the barking, why would the dog connect now in that moment? Because they're not having that supportive aspect. So some dogs then they'll just think either, well, there's no point communicating anymore, or they'll just keep going through the same process all the time. Or some animals, like with humans, they're thinking, right, I really need this to be heard, so they're going to go up, and they're going to ramp up their communication. So by the time you get an animal who is potentially being biting or whatever else, then that's probably the kind of, it's the ultimate sanction the dog has, right? Which is like, I really need you to listen right now. This is not working for me. And I think these are all things that we need to think about. I think the general public are being, especially because a lot of the stuff that's in the received wisdoms, a lot of the TV shows are probably about 30 years out of date. And it's not very helpful because we're just creating this battle of wills rather than connecting to, if we have on the one side the task-orientated approach, if we think about a more care-orientated approach, which is just about learning from the other first and being able to think, okay, how do I support you through this process? What I find working with the general public, most of the people I work with are like, right, well, I do care about my dog. I just didn't realize this. And I think most of the issues we have, it comes down to lack of awareness.
I think that you just hit nail on the head is people want to do the right thing, but they don't know how to recognise the signs or possibly where to go to when they've got those signs. So can you give advice on people that are around the country, not always in your area to come to you, but where would they get the right information that you'd be happy about promoting?
This is the big challenge, Tammy, because not only have the general public been kind of gone down this kind of, well, if I do all the training stuff and my dog's obedient, everything's okay, and that's just a part of the story. Also, we have an unregulated industry, sadly. Right. So it's very difficult. I'm going to employ a behaviourist, I'm going to employ a trainer, and anybody can be those things. As an industry, we've not been very good at trying to firm that up, but there are two main organisations, I think. We have the Animal Behaviour and Training Council, ABTC, and we have the UK Dog Behaviour and Training Charter, which I was involved with. And I think if you find somebody who is a part of an organisation that is part of those things, and especially if you go to your vet, I think the vet should know who are the good people in that area to give the best support.
Yeah.
So it is hard. It's hard for caregivers. Most of the people I meet are stuck in task. I must stop my dog pulling. I must stop my dog barking. I must whatever. and they're doing all the things they see online. The problem is, I think, especially since COVID, especially when we had a big explosion online, there's a lot of stuff out there, a lot of the big names that are big on social media, they're just really good at getting tasks done.
Right.
So for me, a punishment or aversive approach is the ultimate manifestation of task at all costs. I can make sure your dog doesn't do that anymore. And that's quite alluring, right? Because the caregiver just thinks, oh God, if my dog could just stop barking.
Just want an easy solution.
Yeah, an easy solution, or even just, I think for them, because we're so, what I'm trying to do with my platform, and many others are doing the same, is just to try and provide a mindset shift when it comes to behaviour. Behaviour, it's very easy to fall into that good-bad thing about thinking, okay, my dog's behaving badly, so therefore if my dog could just behave like this, we'd all be okay. I totally get that, but that isn't representative of what that animal was trying to communicate in the first place. And I think that's important for us. And especially when we think about, what I love about the work that you do with your kind of street vets, Hal. When I see the relationship with many people who are living on the streets and their dog, that is the ultimate form of this connection, because they're not interested in sit down, come stay. They're interested in the fact that their combined stories provide part of their combined survival story, and it's a deep bond. And I think it's outrageous how often people are expected to to be faced with the choice of, I'm going to lose my secure attachment bond with my friend in order to access facilities or access support. And I think we've really got to look at that, because that bond, that secure attachment that we seek, we can find it with an animal. We don't have to find it with another human being. In fact, on my dog centre care channel, I get to interview all these wonderful people. And many people who've had this mindset shift, they've either had it because they've been influenced by hearing other people, or their own trauma, their own challenges, their own difficulties in life. They found that secure attachment with that animal for the first time, that unconditionality, and they realised the value of it. They felt the quality of that presence.
And I don't think there's any shame in having that relationship and being proud of it.
No.
And before, maybe years ago, people might think that was sad or whatever, but I think we're at a point now where we all accept our relationships with animals are vital to our well-being.
Yeah.
But it shouldn't just be that way. It should be that we're vital to their well-being.
Yes.
And I think it's encouraging the owners to realise what's right for what's well-being for that individual. As your well-being might be different than mine, it's the same with the animals, isn't it? And it's recognising those.
I love that, and that's the key bit. This is the big shift, I think, because there's a saying which is that the path to coercion is often laid with good intention.
Right.
So I might think, if only Tammy would behave like this or do this, she'll feel better and feel safer. But will you? Because that's my version of safety, that's my story, it's not necessarily yours. And we can all do that in relationships, right? We can always think, I know what's best. Actually, guess what, it wasn't. And I think when we have the animals there, I think it's about slowing things down. It's about taking time to learn about the animal in front of us. It's okay to have a study of one. You can think, right, as for the caregivers listening in, your dog has a story to share with you. And even some of those challenging behaviours, that's part of their story often. And I think we need to equip and inform the general public with more information, especially the two main areas for me when you think about things. One is the developmental stages. A lot of what we do in that first 12 months that is a received wisdom about bringing up a dog, we need to change it. Because actually the most important thing, my husband and I, we took a young dog in not so long ago. She was 16 weeks when she came to us. She'd had 2 homes, bless her, very busy. She liked to use her mouth, as puppies do, but she was really...
What breed was she?
Labrador,
Right.
Little blonde Labrador, Molly. Mollysaurus, we called her, because of her teeth. So she was very bitey, very pully all over the shop. So I can see why she struggled to fit in. The temptation is to think, right, how do we stop the biting? How do we stop the pulling? How do we stop this? Whereas in fact, we had to step back and learn her story. And even at 16 weeks, I share this in conference speeches, I give footage of Molly at a very young age telling us how she needs to navigate the world so she can learn to regulate better. So actually then, rather than teach Molly stuff, this is the big shift, because actually to learn from her first was important. And there was only 3 things I really wanted her to learn from us in that first 12 months. One is that she was safe. That's important. Secondly, that she had a voice.
Right.
And she had a big one, and
it
we
was
would
heard.
listen, and it was
Yeah.
heard. And thirdly, that we were her return to safety. Those are important points, and this is what we're looking at in the progressive side of child educational psychology and development now, and how important these things are. So I have my little dog-centered care mantra, really, which is learn, support, teach. Learn from the dog first, even a puppy, because they've got tons to tell us. Support what we've learned, especially regarding their need for relief and safety needs, and then teach things that are likely to be intrinsically valuable for them to cope. Then after that, train what you like. And the other area where this is important is working with reactive aggressive dogs, because forget about punishment. Punishment never really helps because it just suppresses communication. But even reinforcement, powerful tool. We have to be really mindful that when we're working with a dog who is struggling, so we're not just teaching them new skills, which is great. We're having a dog who's saying, I'm struggling to navigate this social environment. I'm struggling to feel safe. Or that young puppy who's just working out their place in the world. We've got to be careful with reinforcement because it's powerful, that we're not just getting behaviours that we find appropriate.
It's about us, not them.
And we see the same problem with children. Many of us, comes back to this, there's a difference between what we're taught and what we truly learn. So if you imagine little Johnny, he's gone to school today, that's an achievement for him. It's an achievement because he hasn't had breakfast, he's not slept, he's got trauma at home. But he can't learn in that state, so he can't go on to attain what's asked of him in an extrinsic way. And we see the same with dogs. So many dogs are just written off because they're not learning the way that we want them to be. Or I have my little doors of the brain analogy, which is a really good one when we think about the ability for the brain to process. So if you imagine ours, same applies to our dogs. So to talk about dogs, imagine the dog's brain has lots of little doors in it. We need as many doors to stay open for that dog to have a chance of being able to process what's going on, and especially for the sensory integration process to work well. So sensory integration is just how our brain takes on information through our senses. And that should be happening quite efficiently and subconsciously, actually. Pain, trauma, stress, all big door closers. And this is the important thing for dogs. Guess what? The first doors are likely to start closing, the doors we put training behind, because a lot of the stuff we train a dog has no intrinsic value to them. The doors are likely to stay open are their survival doors.
Can you explain what wouldn't be of value to them in the training that might take place?
Most of it.
Most.
We have to just be realistic about it because, I was in the vets recently, just seeing some vet colleagues up there. Lady comes in with the dog has to go on the weighing scales. Dog's like, I've got them at the vets. It's like when I go to the dentist, it's like, not got many doors open. Manages to get the dog on the weighing scales and then spends the next 5 minutes trying to get the dog to sit on it.
Yeah.
We don't have to get the dog to sit on it, but we're so conditioned to it. You must sit, like more stress and the dog's not listening. So the problem there is the dog is now being disobedient. No, the dog just hasn't got enough doors open to really hear what you're saying right now because the brain has to focus on something more fundamental, which is, I really don't like the vets and I'm struggling to cope. So a lot of training, the training is important in as far as it's how we communicate and we build up an understanding with our dogs, but we also have to recognize, for me, everything is a request. We can use the word command or anything we want to, but it's a case, okay, I'm going to say this to you now, but I have to wait for the feedback. All right, you're not doing it now, why? And it's not a case of often that they won't, it's because they can't. Now this is a problem because when we think about developmental stuff, especially there's a part of the brain, the moderating part of the brain that helps us to deal with the emotional stuff and helps us to regulate a little bit. And bearing in mind, all juvenile social mammals are designed to dysregulate.
Right.
Okay. Why Mother Nature wants that, who knows? But so that part of the brain for us humans starts in our kind of teens, it's fully formed by our late 20s. In dogs, it doesn't really start until 18 months.
And that was a question I was going to ask you about the age of development and what they're going to learn at what point.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. So a lot of those doors aren't even open yet for that young dog.
Right.
And for them, the brain's thinking, right, how do I feel safe? How do I process stuff? There's three really important words here: processing, engagements, and exits. What does that young dog, and these apply to, especially to when we're working with reactive and aggressive dogs, as I say, but even that young dog, but these three words apply to us too. So as a young dog, then you're thinking, right, I need to process stuff. And if they've got enough doors open and their nervous system isn't too engaged, using the good old bucket analogy, if you imagine the bucket as the nervous system and the water in the bucket is how much that nervous system is engaged, then they're able to process quite well, and that sensory integration process is working quite well. Remember, pain, trauma, stress, excitement and frustration and stress. If that bucket's a bit too full, or they're hanging on, I just need more time to process this, but they're being asked to do something else, it becomes quite overwhelming. So, and then engagement. We all want to feel that we have choice and agency on how we engage with the world around us, emotionally, physically, socially, doesn't matter. Again, if you're quite robust, if you regulate well, it doesn't matter too much. So if I'd come in today and gave you a big hug and a kiss, Tammy, right, you might think, oh, Andy's a bit weird. Or you might think, actually, that was quite difficult for me because I struggle with that kind of social thing. And then the exit bit is really important. When we choose to engage with anything, we want to feel we have choice and agency over exit. Or if we don't want to, we want to exit. And most trauma, actually, if you think about it, is based around lack of choice and agency over engagement and exit. So you find yourself in a situation you don't want to be in and you can't get away, and that is traumatic. Yeah. Whether or not it becomes traumatizing very much depends on things. So when we think about that young developing brain then, it's no wonder dogs think, hang on, I just don't get time to process. I haven't even processed yet, therefore happens. Or engagement, especially social engagement, keeps coming. Everybody wants to touch you, dogs run over to you, and they can't exit because they're on a lead, or all these things are really important. I do a lot of work consultancy-wise for assistance dog charities. Yes. Well, we're really looking into this now because the notion of socializing has to be more than the arbitrary narratives that we have. So with Molly, this is why I like sharing the videos for her. She was telling me really clearly, even at 17, 18 weeks, actually, I can't do this right now. I need to stop for a second. And I'd walk ahead of her slightly. No, she wouldn't move, so I walk back to her. She's telling me, I can't do that. I can't do this. I need to do this. That's where my exit is. When you get a young dog, our first priority in that first 12 months is to support a nervous system and regulatory system that can regulate well, regardless of what that animal's experiencing, because then they're more likely to do the tasks that we want from them. And especially when you think about an assistance dog, sometimes, you know, it's important. It could be life and death for the client, for the service dog user. The dog's more likely to do the task if they're physically and emotionally well regulated. So putting my pet remedy hat on, this is why we're really pushing this notion of emotional well-being matters, because it really does. If you've got a dog and I spoke at a gun dog conference last year, so that's really task-orientated, doing gun dog, right? That dog's more likely to be able to do it if they're physically and emotionally well regulated. It's not rocket science. We know that ourselves, actually. So I think this is where we've got to start thinking about things. A lot of dogs end up being relinquished from caregivers in that first 12 to 18 months. You know, as May would probably agree, I think with her work in rescue, I saw a statistic from, this is pre-COVID, but about 45% of dogs that end up in the rescue within that one organisation end up being adolescents. Because the general public, to say we're failing the general public by not talking about this stuff. Because if they're thinking, well, hang on, I'm doing all the training and the dog's not doing it, therefore there must be something wrong with the dog.
They need to be a bit more open about, it's not always failing, is it? It's about just not knowing what to do.
Awareness.
It's not knowing.
Exactly, and I think, when you have a dog who's like, I'm happy to learn and I really want to do this stuff for you, but right now I don't feel safe, or right now I'm feeling overwhelmed by this stuff, then everybody's failing. And the thing about task-orientated approach only is if the task is the ultimate goal and we can't do it, then people feel blame. Either the caregiver feels not good enough, the dog's not good enough, or even the trainer doesn't feel good enough, because some trainers, some colleagues don't understand this other side of things. And they think, well, why isn't it? It must be me then, because I'll do it. But I think, so this is the big shift, and we have to recognise that we make these animals come into our lives. They are a beautiful, rich, sentient being who has their own kind of needs, their own emotional needs. And this is the thing, for too long we've pushed away this notion of animals and emotionality. And it's crazy when most of the stuff we've learnt about our own emotionality, we've done on studies on animals, and primarily mice, actually. Right. So we're like, okay, we're going to study mice. Okay, we're going to take that and make it about our own experience as a human, let alone a dog who shares so much with us from a neurobiological point of view. And I say a lot of the early studies on social pain, for example, were directly done with dogs. The social pain hypothesis, which was, they took puppies away from mom, and the their pups are like, I can't go, I haven't got mom. So they injected the pups with a mild opioid, which is a pain reliever from a physical pain, and the puppies are like, oh, I can cope now. So the hypothesis was maybe social pain hurts like physical pain. Jump forward now to Matthew Lieberman over at UCLA. Great book called Social, by the way. He's now proven this. They can show that social rejection, it's called social evaluative threat, that part of the brain is the same part of the brain as physical pain. Well, guess what? The dogs have the same part as us. We now also know that actual long-term social detachment, loneliness, if you like, this is very relevant for people living on the streets. It literally changes us physiologically. So it dials down our antiviral response, because what the body's saying is, I'm away from my social unit, so I don't have to be protected against the common stuff. And it dials up our inflammatory responses. So it's no wonder then that there's so many studies that are looking at how loneliness affects health. How many dogs, especially when they're young, are trying to communicate need for relief or need for connection, but we're so conditioned that they're being naughty, they're being bad, and we're just pushing them away or telling them off. What does that do for that social brain? What does it do for that child who's experiencing the same thing? So I think we're at a stage now in behavioural science where we don't have to be waiting for the next study to come out to prove stuff. It's more a case of we need the studies to come out to disprove stuff.
And what if you could put together a study, what would be the top one that you would like to be proved or disproved?
We need more on how dogs need to do more on their social processing. We've had a few come out recently which have been really good. They've been very small, especially recognising that dogs don't socially process too good with their eyes. It's their nose that needs to kick in. A lot of reactive dogs, their eye visual input's dialed up too much. But we're already starting to see with some of these early little studies that one of the first things the dog will do, as long as they're in the right place to, is air scent first. Air scent, and then looking at what they're calling like drive-bys. I'm going to come in and get a bit of scent, and they build that picture up. It's really interesting for me when I meet these socially sensitive dogs myself. When they feel ready to, they may be air scented, but when they come and sniff me, they'll sniff me from the side or behind, because remember, processing, engagement, exit, they're like, okay, I want to process you, but I want to avoid the engagement. Because a lot of these dogs, especially the dogs I work with who struggle around with the dogs, for example, I'm quite lucky I have a nice big 2-acre space that I do a lot of observations in. But the number of these dogs who are like, do you know what, Mike, I haven't got a problem with dogs per se, I just can't process what I need to feel safe because engagement keeps coming first, or I can't exit.
Overwhelming for them.
Yeah, and it is for us. And just one that point on that, social processing takes a lot of juice. So even for us as a social species, if you're not feeling very well, if you're tired, if you're in pain, and you see a friend in town, you're more likely to avoid them.
It's true.
Because you don't have the social bandwidth for it. And that's potentially a safe interaction, one that you know about. We put way too many expectations on these animals to have to be social, when they actually, in order to be a social species, the evolutionary element of that, Mother Nature wants to make sure that we tick a lot of boxes first, because to be social and to have cooperative care as part of that, there's a big element of social safety that has to go with it. And that's why when we think about the kind of information we get from like polyvagal theory, anybody who's...
Yeah, explain that.
Can I? That's right. Let's just, there's a lot of discussion, but the main thing there is that one of the big things important for the social point of view is when you feel that stress, when you feel that pressure, part of that, the vagus system, the vagal system connects everything really. So all our vital organs are connected, and it's a two-way communicator. So in the past, we used to think the brain controlled everything. Mm-hmm. But for example, we know that between the brain and the gut, 80% of that information goes from the gut to the brain, not the other way around. That's the actual thing. So, but looking at it from the social safety point of view, the kind of theory is when you are feeling under pressure, your first thing from your nervous system response is to seek support from your social network first. And if that doesn't come...
comfort blanket.
Yeah, if that doesn't come, then your fight or flight will kick in and you'll have to deal with it yourself. So all these kind of things. So polyvagal attachment theory, which is John Bowlby's work, I've touched on that a little bit as well. Thinking about social safety, social processing, the damage that comes with social rejection. It's all connected because we're a social species, actually. And even those people who feel the most gregarious socially, there will be situations that they feel uncomfortable with. But the more robust you are, the better you can regulate, the more that you're able to feel you have strategies the more you're able to deal with those ups and downs that come along. But if you're very socially sensitive, like there's a lot of surveys and studies done with adults who are socially anxious, who can pinpoint back to adolescence specifically, and the times that they were forced, remember, processing, engagement, exit, forced into engagements with no exits. Even something as simple as they're up in their bedroom, the families come around and they're forced to come down. And this comes back to that thing that I wrote an article on this recently, actually, this kind of saying, well, they've got to learn. Remember, there's a difference between what we're taught and what we learn. So we feel you've got to come down and be sociable. You've got to learn to do that. You know, many people point to having to do communal changing at schools, all these kind of things. But for that very sensitive brain, we don't learn to be sociable. We learn to mask better. We learn to push emotions away. We learn our emotional needs are somehow invalid. Even asking a child, you can't eat your pudding until you've eaten your vegetables. We've all been there, right? But what are we saying to that young brain regarding choice over what goes in their body and emotional and social safety? What are we saying to that child? What we're saying is, you're going to have to do stuff you feel uncomfortable with in order to get
it's like a structure, isn't it? Yeah. You have to be structured this way.
And that plays into a lot of things, especially when we think about safeguarding and that kind of thing, what we're saying to that young child. And so it's a big picture, isn't it? And I think when we connect to animals in this way, and we feel the quality of their presence, really, and their survival stories, you can't help but have that mirror back to us. And this comes back again to what you guys do with street vets. These stories of many humans who have been disenfranchised from so much, who, my husband's and I think he's also, he works in hospice now, but he's worked in other places, but he's worked with many people who've come from the kind of, from living on the streets, who really struggle even to receive care initially, because they've got so convinced that nobody cares. Even that first touch, oh my God, you touched me. Nobody touches me. Not because they don't want to be touched, it's just that people don't touch you, you know? So I think it's powerful, and I think the emotional experience is important, and it's hard to turn up to the emotional needs of another, because our own brain creates a safe worldview based on our own beliefs and value systems, and it wants to protect that worldview with cognitive biases and distortions. So so it's hard to turn up to another rather than think, I know what's best for you. Because that's what a lot of training and teaching is. Me who knows must tell you who does not.
That's really well put, yeah.
Whereas in fact the animal has something to tell us too, as does the child, regarding their own safety needs. I think that's important. I have my CAKE acronym.
Go on.
I can finish on that if you like. Because we all love cake, right? And it helps us a little bit. So compassion, awareness, knowledge and empathy. These help us. Compassion's a really good place to start, because it helps us to turn up. So even though we might judge a situation or a person, I might look at that intake form and the person shared with me that they've used all these aversive tools and they're using all sorts of words like dominance and everything else. So my judgy brain's going off on one, because we can't not judge, but we can change our relationship with judgment. It doesn't have to drive our response. So my compassion, I'll turn up anyway. I will turn up anyway. It's not condoning, it's not supporting, but I will turn up anyway. And then the awareness. We want to support their awareness of their dog's needs, but I must start by supporting my awareness of yours without judgment. There's no point me stopping and saying, Tammy, we don't say that anymore, darling. We don't do this, we don't do that. I need to meet you on your terms, and I need to hear your story, because you have an emotional connection here, an emotional experience. And then knowledge. Obviously, I have some knowledge, but that's not the point. I'm here to seek knowledge, to truly seek knowledge from you. And the same thing applies to the dog. We have to be humble enough to recognize that my perception isn't the thing. It's the other's lived experience. And then if we have compassion, awareness and knowledge, then we can have the empathy which we need. And I think the most important thing is recognizing that, especially as a professional, whether you're a vet or a trainer or a behaviourist, it's important to turn up and be supportive of the emotional experience of the person in front of you, but we're not responsible for it. That's the bit that we protect ourselves from. So that's important, I think. It's very important to get those truly best outcomes, because, even the most complex cases, when the animal feels heard, when the animal feels safe, and they have relief for what they were trying to communicate, which is often pain, physical, emotional, social, guess what? The behaviour changes.
fascinating.
And it's and that you don't have to do anything more. You don't have to keep doing it all the time, because when the animals, I can take it from here. I can cope now.
Yeah.
I think it's great. And I think there's somebody called Jerry Lee Kroll, who's a clinical social worker in America, whose saying is used a lot, which is there is a difference between quiet and compliant and calm and well-regulated. Now, she was talking about children, but it's the same with dogs.
Can you repeat that again?
Yeah, there's a difference between quiet and compliant, which training can often do, especially punishment. Isn't it great how that dog's behaving? Isn't that wonderful? Because they're quiet and they're compliant. Right. Rather than truly calm and well-regulated, as in the dog's like, yeah, I'm actually quite cool, thanks very much. We see the same with children. So Jerry Lee Kroll is doing some great work in America with children, trying to change the adoption process. I think it's similar to what we need to think about with rescue here. So in the past, the onus was on the child to become adoptable. You know, if you don't behave like this, nobody will love you. Right, that's how it is. Same with dogs. You know, we've got to get this dog to not do that, because nobody's going to have this dog if they're doing that. The shift with that, is to actually say, the onus should be on the adopter to understand that child's needs, care and support needs, and that's what we see with the better run rescues now with dogs, because like, yeah, we've got Rover here. They have some challenging presentations. That's just because they're lacking in secure attachments. We'll support you, or they've got these needs, or whatever it is. That's a much healthier way of doing it.
Do you think, though, that there's enough keepers stroke owners who know how to do what you're suggesting there, that the adoptee is going to turn up with potential issues and it's down to the keeper to help with those? That keeper's going to have to be well read, and knowledgeable. But
you know, in my experience of working with rescue colleagues, the guys and gals on the shop floor, if you like, they do get it. They see it, they feel a little pressure sometimes, depends on the shelter, to kind of do the task stuff, but they connect deeply. They understand these dogs. They know what they're needing. They know they're struggling because of this, that, and the other. And they create those secure attachments. They see the shift in that dog because that dog now starts to feel safe. And part of the thing about especially emotional safety is not only feeling safe to feel, that's quite profound, isn't it? Mm. We've all been in situations where we sometimes think, this feeling isn't valid. Yeah. It's a horrible thing. But the biggest part of emotional safety is the ability to feel safe, to communicate how you feel. And that's the only way that dogs can do it. I see behaviour as, especially with working with animals, as them being able to paint a picture for me. Mm-hmm. I want them to paint that picture. I don't want to keep grabbing the brush off them because I feel I can paint it better for them. Mm-hmm. I never want a dog to not behave how they feel they need to. Now, obviously, if that is in a potentially dangerous way, we have to mitigate for that. But actually, no animal is safer to be around by being made to feel less safe. It doesn't make sense. And I think my colleagues in rescue understand this very fundamentally. It is a shift. It's a mindset shift. It's like allowing that process to go so that we can say, right, this is the dog we have now. These are the skills that we need to give you as a caregiver. Again, putting my pet remedy hat on, we've got our pet remedy partnership. We've got a great adoption video, pre-adoption video that was combined with input from myself and people like Sarah Fisher, wonderful people. And then all our rescue partners, they have that video, and it's kind of done for their own little rescue, or big rescue. So the idea is then before you take Rover home, you watch the pre-adoption video, mm-hmm. which talks about the importance of taking things slow, giving that dog a chance to tell you stuff, making sure you get back to the rescue if you see these things, because if the dog is struggling, these aren't problems, that's just that dog saying, this is difficult for me, that's challenging for me. And this high kind of return rate that can happen within a very short amount of time, again, a lot of rescues point to within 4 to 6 weeks, there's a big proportion that can come back, because just not enough time, and people get really excited. There's often a lot of information given in packs, and they're told stuff, but they're so excited they're getting Rover home, they're not really listening. So guess what? They invite the whole family around, and then they're going to go down the beach, and they're going to do it, and the dog's like, whoa, I don't even know who you are. I've never been here before. You know, it's a lot of stuff.
Overwhelming again.
So we do need a shift, and I think the move to reinforcement and more humane handling is the really important one. That's moving on. But this conversation is about how do we move forwards? How do we really start to support awareness with the general public about the wonderful, emotionally rich, sentient being in front of them? Yeah. Because it unlocks so much stuff. It improves that bond. It improves communication. It improves relationship.
How much time do you think is acceptable to think that dog is right for that owner?
Well, I think there's a lot of perceptional stuff from the owner on that side of stuff. I think the dog needs as much time as they can have. There's this kind of metric that gets put out, 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months for different things.
Can you explain that?
Well, this is what's said. I don't like it, but I can understand when people say it's like, in the first 3 days, look at this, in the first 3 weeks, look at this, in the first 3 months. But it's so arbitrary. Some dogs, they walk in and think, yeah, this is amazing, yeah, I'm going to sleep over here, we're cool. Yeah. Other dogs like, I need more time, I need a lot more time. Because and especially when we think about a lot of the overseas dogs, rescues that come in, there's a lot for them to process. Dogs who experience trauma, trauma literally rewires the system, and nothing closes those doors like trauma. And you can't force those doors open, they have to open when they're ready. And this is the thing, you could have a dog, for example, we have to have more information about what a truly trauma-informed approach means. So the first golden rule of trauma-informed is don't add more trauma. So how can you do that if you're not letting the dog communicate? If you're constantly trying to suppress behaviour. I see it a lot, you see a dog for that first 2 or 3 months, they're a bit shut down, and then they start barking at the postman, they start barking at the neighbours, so then, I've got to stop the dog barking. No, that's the dog telling you, I feel safe to communicate now. Right. And we're taking that away. So we've got to understand these things more widely. Just changing behaviour doesn't mean anything. Getting a dog to behave differently doesn't mean anything. You can have a dog, for example, who struggles with guests, so we teach them to go to their mat. If we are to say now the dog is coping better, we can't say that. We can say the dog is more compliant now, but we don't know if we're not giving the dog a chance to tell us whether they're coping better or not. So it's a shift. And it's that learn, support, teach. Learn from the dog, support what you've learned, teach things we feel are intrinsically valuable to that safety and that need for relief. Then you can train what you like. I think there's just that little shift. Traditionally, it's been the other way around, that somehow the dog has to learn stuff from us. But how can we teach them? The wonderful Rachel Leather, who's a colleague of mine, who's a trauma expert, she came from human trauma, now works with animals. You can't teach safety because the other has to feel it. So I could teach physical safety to you and say, Tammy, don't put your finger in a plug socket. But you'll probably learn that yourself. But I can't teach you how to feel safe because you have to feel it.
So the dog has to feel safe.
And we have to give them a chance to tell us that.
Yeah. It's fascinating. You could talk for hours and I could listen for hours, and I think we could all... we can do this again next year. What would be your last message to people listening to this? Is it give time? Is it not learn from a professional, talk to a professional?
Don't talk to a professional, speak to your vet for sure. If you have behavioural challenges with your dog, speak to your vet, because there's a good chance that there's something that...
You mentioned about aggression and pain. Yeah. So I've heard that too, that the majority of pain causes the aggression.
Pain, but we have to think about pain more than just physical pain. Right. Physical pain is important, but emotional pain and social pain, it hurts. Yeah. And when you're trying to communicate that you don't feel safe, then that is a form of pain and discomfort. But physical pain, especially, oh my God, I'm really lucky where I'm based because I have an amazing physio colleague, Kate Davey. Hi, Kate, if you're watching. I have a great relationship with my clinical colleagues, especially my vet nurse friends, who really they spend a lot more time with the colleagues. We have to have a joined up approach. The number of these dogs who are presenting with physical pain, and it's no wonder they were grumpy.
And is there a common denominator in what sort of pain? Is it generally back, nerve, or is it something more?
It could be anything. I think the thing is we don't even understand chronic pain in humans very well, let alone in animals. Some things are obvious. There does tend to be an orthopedic bias sometimes, which is, I can manipulate this joint, so therefore everything's okay. But neuropathic is a bigger thing that I see, and that's why I'm very thankful for my colleague Kate, because that's one of her expertise, is looking at the neuropathic, which is nerve kind of response. Ear problems are a big one that go overlooked. Visceral pain, again, something that gets overlooked. Again, we don't even understand that so much in humans. I do a lot of work with Dr. Robert Faulkner-Taylor, who's just amazing, and especially on sensory processing sensitivities. By the way, all these conversations are on my Dog Centre Care YouTube channel with all these wonderful people. Dr. Amber Batson, who's an amazing veterinary behaviourist, I spent 3 days learning from her recently on gut biome. Right. God, it was just interesting, fascinating, and also overwhelming. So we're joining the dots slowly. The big thing I would say to caregivers is when we see behaviour differently, and yes, we must recognise this behaviour is really narking me and it's irritating me and it's upsetting me and frustrating me and all those kind of things, and that's fine. That's what makes it, but often there is a story underneath it. And, you know, do I ever shout at my dogs? Yes, sometimes, because they annoy me. I shout at my husband sometimes, but he shouts at me too. But we do sometimes, so don't beat yourself up about it. But if it's just in the moment, not the end of the world at the end of the day.
Just don't make it a norm.
But if it continues happening and the dog is trying to tell you something, and all the training in the world ain't going to help if that dog doesn't feel safe and doesn't get the relief they're seeking, slowing down is a big thing. When we slow down, when we try and check our own judgments at the door, we start to see patterns developing. And keeping a diary is such a great thing. Keeping Rover's diary and thinking, then you'll think, actually, two things often happen when my clients do this. One, they think, oh, maybe my dog isn't barking as much as I thought they were. And secondly, actually, they're more likely to do it at this time of day or in this situation, patterns. Because then you can start pulling the threads and think, it's interesting. And even in the moment, even on a walk, you know, when I meet a dog, if that dog struggles with other dogs, for example, the last thing I want to do is meet that dog around other dogs first. That might be a couple of sessions down the line, because there is a richness to them I want to learn first. How do you process me? How do you process your caregivers? How do you deal with mild stressors? What does, in the bucket elevation, out the bucket decompression, what does elevation look like for you? How do you regulate? How do you process the general environment? I'm working with a dog at the moment. When they came to my, really bad with dogs, came to the 2-acre lovely quiet space, no problem with dogs. Why? Because it's the environment the bigger thing for that. So the dogs, I can't deal with that stuff because I can't deal with this first. Remember that thing about social processing. I can't deal with the social stuff and because I can't deal with the environmental stuff. In a nice static environment, the dog, I can cope here, this is fine. So actually we've taken that information back out into the environment. There's all sorts of things, this is a discussion for another day, but I work a lot with something that very similar to kind of sensory mapping. How do I help this animal who's struggling so much, help that nervous system map things layer by layer? So that nervous system thing, I've mapped that and I can move that on. Scent is a big one that we utilize a lot. The wonderful principle of free work, ACE free work, Sarah Fisher, please look her up. It's a gift to us, free work.
Tell me, I know we haven't got long, but tell me about what she's telling people.
Well, Sarah's just amazing. I love her, and she's been a big influence for me professionally, Sarah. It is about slowing down. It is about changing our judgment around behaviour. It is about seeing everything as valid. It's just behaviour, and seeing what that animal is telling us through their movement. Not just about their physical needs, but how they're socially processing. Some of the studies I was talking about earlier regarding social processing, actually Sarah's been behind with some of her students. Using free work. So free work is just multiple activities, I suppose you could call it, that involve different elements of the sensory system. So different things, different textures, so the proprioception system, different ways like sort of licking and doing this and doing that. And it's a great way to slow an animal down. She does the same with horses and donkeys. She's got donkeys up at Tilly Farm. It's a way of thinking, it's interesting how that dog's only going around that way and seems to be favouring right-hand movement, not left-hand movement. So that might imply this. Look at the way the stifle's moving. So it gives you a chance to physically look at stuff, but also psychologically. A lot of these dogs will come in, bear in mind there's people watching when you're learning with Sarah, and they might be a bit socially sensitive with people, and they come in and they do a bit of free work, and then they'll look up and have a look at people, and then they'll come around the back of everybody and go back to the free work. Because what we've learned is that free work helps with that sensory integratory process. So when I work with a dog who struggles with guests coming, it's a big part of that, because actually we introduce the dog to that, and the dog has same with dogs who struggle with noise phobias or anything where that one of those sensory inputs are dialed up a bit too much. It's a great way to help with these things. So Sarah's amazing, and the amount of work she's gifted us, especially about understanding physicality. Right. And we know it ourselves, right? Because if you've got an animal who's really struggling with something, and we're asking them to repetitively do the opposite, even through training, I'm going to give you a treat now because you did great, so you're going to have to look at me and get it. Even that looking up and getting it could be uncomfortable for that dog. So is it that positive anymore? Understanding all the different component parts are really important. I've seen dogs just have a session with Sarah, Thank God you've heard me. Great,
Right.
you've given me some relief. Remember, relief is a powerful thing. When we think about reinforcement, there is a difference between extrinsically reinforced to motivate stuff. You're feeling a bit uncomfortable now, but you like cheesecake, so I'm going to get you to do the uncomfortable thing and get the cheesecake. And intrinsic stuff. So relief is the most intrinsically reinforcing thing in the world, right? It's like, oh, phew, you're going to feel this in a minute. Phew, that's over. You know, whatever it is, but that's important. So we've got to get the balance right, I think.
Amazing. And I've learned so much, as everybody here I can see is taking it all in. I think we've got to go away and process it all now. Yeah. And see how we can encourage people to do what you're saying. I hope we can hook up again and do a follow-up from this.
Definitely. I just want to say one thing for people. It is a different thing, but the only lived experience that you can understand and validate is your own, and it is not anthropomorphic to think about that in relation to animals. So think about yourself. We all want to feel safe. Yeah, we all want to communicate our needs. We all want to find relief. We've all found ourselves in situations where our needs haven't been met and we've been forced in situations we feel uncomfortable with. It is no different for the animals we share our lives with, and it makes complete sense when you think about it. So you don't have to worry about it, but do check out my Dog Centre Care YouTube channel. It's all free. We've got 100 conversations in there with the leading experts on trauma, pain, all this kind of stuff. But you can just do a study of one. That dog in front of you, they're waiting to tell you something.
Amazing work. Thank you so much. And we will definitely speak again. So, we've got one question.
Yeah. I think sometimes our beloved animal companions are actually lonely in our company because we're spending so much time on social media.
Well, do you know what there's a saying, and that is understanding the quality of our presence?
Yeah.
Our animals understand the quality of our presence. You can totally be with somebody and still feel lonely if that quality of that presence isn't there. And I see it a lot. Sadly, we live on a wonderful beach down in Devon, and the dogs are there mooching along. The number of times I see the dogs looking at the caregiver, but they're on the phone. It's a shame.
Yes.
But we do it. We've got to be...
Walking and they're on the phone and you're like, just live in the moment.
Yeah, but we need to remember that with our loved ones too. I think that's the key. We can all get stuck in front of screens. Hint, hint, husband. But yes, the quality of our presence matters, especially, but you know what, we've got to live our lives, but finding that time just to be, we can just be, and dogs love it when we're just be with them.
I can see the dog at home looking at that owner for an hour or two on their phone and feeling really lonely in the corner, and it happens, and I know it's there.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. We've all learnt so much from your time and expertise, and we'll speak again. We've got one more talk, which I will post. It's a recorded talk by Lindsay Arliss of Wood Green. But a massive thank you for everybody who has got involved today, and big thanks go out to the Donkey Sanctuary for warmly welcoming us. What's the word?
Welcoming us.
That's the one. Thanks. It's been a long day.
You did amazing, Tam.
Thank you. And yeah, we are very, very grateful, and we will see you again soon. Thank you.